Some men chase what they think women want: the car, the absolute, the clever lines. And for a while, it seems to work. She smiles, she texts back, she shows interest, but then, without warning, it fades. She pulls away, like your presence lost its gravity. You were still consistent, still loyal, still showing effort. But something shifted, and here's the truth. It wasn't because you weren't enough. It was because you didn't touch the part of her that remembers you when you're gone. The part that aches when she doesn't hear from you. The part that wonders, what is he thinking? C-. There are invisible dynamics between men and women. Subtle, psychological, ancient. When activated, they don't just attract a woman, they hold her. Not because you chase her, but because she feels pulled into your world, without even knowing why. And the best part? These aren't tricks, they're principles, rooted in real psychology and carved from the core of Stoic masculinity, the kind of man who moves with calm, who doesn't seek approval, but commands respect by how he carries himself. Society has trained men to perform, to impress, to win her over. But true connection isn't built on performance, it's built on presence. If you've ever felt like you were giving more than you got, if you've ever watched a woman slowly lose interest, without any clear reason, you're not broken. You just haven't been taught the real game. Because the real game isn't about chasing, it's about becoming. In this video, we'll go through 7 forces that make a woman emotionally attached, sometimes even obsessed, with a man who lives with purpose, not all at once, not with effort, but because he knows who he is. If you're ready to attract women without chasing, drop a comment. I'm ready to become magnetic. Let's begin. 1. The possibility of commitment. Before anything real can grow, there has to be a sense of possibility, not certainty, not a promise carved in stone, but a quiet, magnetic maybe. That's what pulls her in. Not the man who says, "I'll give you everything," but the man who lives like his world is something worth being part of. She becomes attached, not because you swear loyalty, but because she can imagine what life beside you could feel like. It's that question that keeps her up at night. Could this be real? Now here's where most men slip. Some rush into commitment, believing speed will secure her affection. Others play it too cool, thinking distance will build mystery. But both paths lead to the same place: disconnection. Why? Because women don't bond through pressure or confusion. They bond through anticipation, not in games, but in emotionally alive spaces. Think about it. You're getting to know someone. Instead of laying down your life story or hinting at marriage, you let your presence speak. You take your time. You show her how you move through the world, how you make decisions, how you treat people, she starts to wonder, do I fit into this man's rhythm? Am I the kind of woman he sees in his future? And that shift, when she starts to assess herself for you, that's when real attachment begins. You're not another man chasing her. You're a man she hopes to earn a place beside. That's the difference. Now here's the Stoic truth. You don't force clarity. You don't panic when she asks, "So, what are we?" You don't bluff and you don't beg. You stay grounded. You respond with calm presence. I'm enjoying this. I value getting to know you. It's honest. It's balanced. It's real. When you live from that space, where commitment is possible, but never desperate, you create emotional gravity. She doesn't feel chased. She feels chosen. She doesn't feel rushed. She feels safe in the uncertainty. And in that stillness, you become the kind of man she hopes to be enough for. That's not a tactic. That's an energy. And that's how obsession begins. 2. Making your attention like a drug. Some men believe that constant attention is love. They send texts every hour, plan dates back to back, ask, "Are you okay?" even when she's just quiet. But here's the truth. For a woman, real attraction lives in contrast, not in the flood of attention, but in the rare spark that feels intentional. Think of your attention like flame. If it's always burning, she forgets it's even there. But if it ignites only when she's near, with warmth, presence, and focus, it becomes unforgettable. That's the difference between a man she likes and a man she can't stop thinking about. Most men give attention like background music, always on, easy to ignore, predictable, but attention that's deliberate. That's what changes everything. Picture this. You're on a date. You're not checking your phone. You're not distracted. You're fully present. You listen deeply. You make her feel seen, desired. For those few hours, she feels alive, like she's the only woman in the world. And then you disappear. Not because you're playing a game, but because you return to your life, your craft, your mission. You're not being cold, you're being complete. This creates space. It lets her feel the silence, replay your words, relive the eye contact, feel the electricity, and in that space, the craving grows, not because you vanished, but because your presence was worth missing. That's how you go from being a nice guy to becoming a man she replays in her mind. You become rare. And what's rare is remembered, even desired, like a luxury scent that lingers in memory, or a song she wants to hear again. Now ask yourself, are you giving her attention, or are you giving her an experience? Attention should be sacred, not sprayed like cologne, but chosen like a gift. This is where Stoicism comes in. You don't give to get. You give with clarity, with measure, with presence. Your time is valuable. Your energy is finite. So don't waste it trying to prove something. Invest it where it matters. When you do that, your attention becomes addictive, not because it overwhelms, but because it elevates. And when she feels elevated in your presence, but grounded in your absence, you create the kind of contrast that makes her crave more. That's not manipulation. That's maturity. That's not a tactic. That's masculine restraint. That is power. 3. Using silence to your advantage. Most men fear silence. They rush to fill the quiet with words, with jokes, with reassurance, because silence feels uncomfortable and discomfort feels like danger. But a high-value man, he sees silence differently, not as a void dash, but as a signal, a place where something real can take shape. See, in silence, a woman leans in. She listens. She starts to feel instead of just hear. It's not emptiness. It's depth. It's space for emotions to breathe. Modern dating is noisy. Endless texts, flashing notifications, people talking to be heard, but not to connect. That's why silence stands out. It's a lighthouse in a storm. Imagine this. You're sitting across from her. She shares something real, a memory, a pain, a dream. Most men would interrupt, try to comfort, try to fix. But you pause, you hold eye contact, you nod, and you say, nothing. In that pause, she doesn't feel dismissed. She feels held. She doesn't feel alone. She feels understood, not because of your reply, but because you allowed the moment to exist. That's presence. That's power. It goes beyond conversation. When you don't rush to reply to her texts, not because you're playing hard to get, but because you're living your life. You're sending a silent message. You're not addicted to attention. You're not chasing approval. You're grounded, rooted, occupied with purpose. And she begins to wonder, what's he thinking? Is he thinking of me? That's when the silence becomes magnetic. Stoic men understand restraint. We don't speak to fill the air. We speak when it matters. We don't move to prove a point. We move when it's time. And in silence, we give others room to reveal themselves. Here's something subtle. When you're quiet, she projects her own thoughts onto you, her hopes, her fears, her desire. She fills the blank spaces with meaning, and that's where the bond grows. But like all powerful things, silence must be used with care. Too much, and it feels like distance, coldness, disinterest. Use it like punctuation. Let it shape your rhythm. Pause when she says something deep. Let her words echo before yours arrive. Let the silence make your presence louder, because sometimes the most unforgettable thing you can say is nothing at all. 4. Creating small concessions. Most men think that to win a woman's heart, they have to give more time, more attention, more gifts. But here's a quieter truth. If you want her to truly value you, you have to let her invest. Not in grand gestures, not in dramatic sacrifices, but in the small things, the tiny, almost invisible ways. She steps closer to you, because when a woman gives a part of herself, even something small, her heart follows. This isn't manipulation, it's human psychology. It's called the commitment and consistency principle. When someone invests time, effort, or care, their mind naturally starts to believe, this must be important. This must be worth it. Think about it. You're on your third date. Instead of planning every detail, you say, "Hey, bring that bottle of wine you mentioned." Simple, effortless, but now she's contributed, or she once told you about a playlist she loved. You ask her to send it. You show genuine interest. Now she's not just receiving from you, she's sharing her world with you. That's intimacy. That's investment. But here's where most men go wrong. They either demand too much or they do everything themselves, thinking it shows strength. Real strength is creating space for her to give, not because you need it, but because you're inviting her into your rhythm, your process, your life. Every small yes she gives you builds emotional equity. And the more she gives, the more she feels connected. She's not just a guest anymore. She's part of something she's helping to build. And when she's building, she's belonging. That's how attachment grows. Not through one massive moment, but through countless tiny threads woven quietly over time. Tone matters. You're not delegating tasks. You're opening doors. And every time she steps through one, you acknowledge it. You appreciate it. You see it. A simple thank you after a small gesture can echo louder than 1,000 compliments. Because what she really craves is not just to be adored, it's to feel necessary, valued, included. Over time, she won't just see you as someone she enjoys. She'll see you as someone she's committed to, because she's already planted roots in your world. And people fight to protect what they help grow. If you're ready to let her invest in you, drop a comment. I'm building something worth choosing. 5. Building a narrative. She believes in. Attraction is only the spark. Connection is the fire that keeps burning. If you want a woman to feel truly bonded to you, you must offer more than chemistry. You must offer a story. Because women don't just fall in love with a man. They fall in love with the meaning they attach to him. It's not about the laughs, the dates, the gifts. It's about what those moments represent. When she looks back, what story does she tell herself? Was she just another fleeting chapter? Or was she part of a journey worth remembering? Picture this. You're laughing together, uncontrollably, and you say, I don't remember the last time I laughed this hard. There's something about your energy that feels lighter. That's not just a compliment. It's narrative building. You're saying, dash, this connection matters. This is different. Later, you call back to shared memories. You know, this reminds me of that night we talked for hours at the cafe. Suddenly, every shared experience becomes a thread, and those threads weave a story where she plays a meaningful role. But here's the Stoic truth. You don't craft stories to manipulate. You don't fabricate meaning just to hook her in. You live with presence. You speak with intention. You collect memories because you value them, not because you're trying to trap someone. And women can feel the difference. They feel when it's real. Be specific in your compliments, not "you're beautiful," but "there's something wild and thoughtful about the way you see the world. It makes being around you different." Let your actions back it up. Consistency, attention, presence. These are the plot points that tell her this isn't just another story. It's a story that matters, because once she believes, she's part of something bigger, something alive, something real. She won't want to be written out of it. If you're ready to build a story that matters, drop a comment. I live with presence. 6. Making her feel unique. Once a woman feels connected, the next step is even deeper. Making her feel truly unique. Every woman wants to be seen, not just admired for beauty, but recognized for something no one else notices. And this is where most men fail. They offer generic compliments. You're gorgeous. You're amazing. Nice words, but forgettable, because she's heard them before 100 times. From men who never really looked. But when you notice the small things, the way her smile changes when she talks about her passions, the timing of her jokes, how her voice softens when she speaks of what she loves, you create something rare. You make her feel irreplaceable. Imagine she tells you she loves classical music. Later, you casually say, "I listened to Debussy the other day. I finally understood what you meant, how it's peaceful, yet haunting." In that moment, she doesn't just feel complimented, she feels understood. You're not just praising, you're reflecting her world back to her, and that is powerful. Making her feel unique isn't about big gestures. It's about precision. It's about remembering the little things, not to impress, but to genuinely connect. Maybe she mentions her favorite dessert. You show up with it. No grand speech, just a quiet smile. She thinks to herself, he actually listens. And that thought, that realization, builds trust, builds affection, builds meaning. Here's the deeper Stoic layer. A Stoic man listens not to reply, not to flatter, but to truly know. He listens with presence. He listens without an agenda. And in that sacred space, a woman feels safe enough. to let go of her defenses, to be herself. That's when real connection happens, not through perfection, but through understanding. If you're ready to see her the way no one else does, drop a comment. I listen with presence. 7. Challenge her gently. If you truly want to stand apart, don't just make her feel adored. Make her grow. Most men fall into one of two traps. They either agree with everything she says, hoping to stay in her good graces, or they argue every point, trying to dominate the conversation. Both paths fail, not because women dislike affection or strength, but because neither shows true respect, for her mind or for your own. A high-value man chooses a different road. He doesn't challenge to win. He challenges to elevate the conversation, the connection, even her. Imagine she says, "I think traveling is the best way to grow as a person." Instead of agreeing blindly or dismissing her thought, you pause, smile, and ask, do you think someone can still grow if they never leave their hometown? Not combative, not confrontational, just curious, just present. That single moment sparks something deeper. Now, she's not just emotionally engaged, she's intellectually alive. Most men miss this. Women don't just crave emotional intimacy, they crave mental stimulation. They want to be challenged, but in a way that's playful, respectful, exciting. You can tease her lightly, push her perspective gently, invite her to step forward. Maybe you say, "You always talk about your great taste. Why don't you plan our next date and show me?" Now she's not just a passenger, she's a partner. She's investing, engaging, creating alongside you. This kind of dynamic keeps the energy alive. You're not predictable. You're not bending to please. You're not shutting her down either. You're moving on that delicate line where chemistry truly lives. And here's the Stoic truth. You hold firm to your values, but you stay open to her mind. You don't argue for ego. You seek growth, truth, clarity. In that space, she sees something rare. A man who respects himself enough to lead and respects her enough to invite her along. When you challenge her in the right way, you don't just excite her emotions. You awaken her mind. You ignite her feminine energy, all at once. If you're ready to lead with presence, drop a comment. I elevate those around me. Once a woman feels that balance, she doesn't just like you. She becomes captivated by you, not because you forced it, but because you lived it. Now that we've uncovered all 7 emotional triggers, it's time to bring everything together. And we close this journey with integrity. You haven't just learned tactics. You've uncovered tools of presence, of strength, of purpose. Elements that don't just attract women, they anchor them quietly, deeply, irresistibly. But here's the truth most men overlook. These 7 triggers aren't tricks. They are reflections of the man you become. When you stop chasing validation and start leading with intention, let's Recap. When you offer the possibility of commitment, not rushed, not withheld, you create wonder. When your attention is rare and deliberate, you become addictive. When you embrace silence, you stand apart in a world drowning in noise. When you invite her to make small concessions, you pull her gently into your life. When you build a narrative she can believe in, you offer her meaning, not just memories. When you make her feel uniquely seen, you touch the deepest part of her spirit. And when you challenge her mind, not to dominate, but to elevate, you earn her respect and her obsession. Understand this. None of these are about controlling her. They're about embodying presence, precision, purpose. Because at the center of a woman's deepest desire isn't a man who tries to impress. It's a man so alive, so authentic, that she's drawn into his gravity without resistance. And that's who you are becoming, not through games, not through manipulation, but through discipline, awareness, and courage. Now here's your next step. Pick one of these 7 shifts, just one. Apply it this week. Let her feel the difference. Let yourself feel the difference. Then return here. Comment what you experienced, what changed. If you found value here, like this video. Subscribe for more insights on leading your life and relationships. With wisdom, with stillness, with undeniable strength. Remember, high-value men don't seek validation. They become the standard. And women, they don't just follow, they attach. Until next time, stay grounded, stay intentional, and stay true to your worth. Welcome to the Stoic Spirit. If you're here, it's probably not by accident, because what we're about to unpack might shift the way you see yourself and how others see you too. See, truly intelligent men don't just shine in what they know. Their strength lies in what they choose not to say. They've mastered the pause. They've learned that silence at the right time speaks louder than 1,000 clever words. I've watched men in boardrooms, in barbershops, on quiet walks under streetlights. And I've learned something. The ones with the deepest wisdom aren't the ones who interrupt. They're the ones who listen, who weigh their words, who don't rush to fill the silence just to be heard. And here's the truth. No one tells you. Every time you speak, you're either building your credibility or breaking it down. That's why the sharpest men avoid certain phrases, not because they're perfect, but because they've been burned. They've learned, often painfully, that some words cost more than they're worth. So today, we'll uncover 7 things wise men simply don't say. Not because they fear being wrong, but because they know the price of careless talk. Stick around, brother, and if you find yourself nodding, hit that subscribe button. Let's walk this road with clarity, strength, and a little more silence. I already know that. There's a sentence that sounds harmless, even confident, but it quietly poisons the mind. I already know that. I used to say it a lot, not out loud, but in my head. The moment someone offered advice or shared something familiar, I'd shut the door before it even opened. It happened once during a workshop years ago. An older speaker was walking us through a concept I'd read about a dozen times. I crossed my arms, tuned out, and thought, I've heard this before. But then he said something, one sentence, buried in the middle, that reframed everything I thought I understood, and I missed it. Because I was too busy convincing myself I already knew. That night, I realized something. When a man says, I already know that, what he's often saying is, I'm done learning. That's not intelligence. That's ego wearing a clever disguise. Stoicism doesn't flatter the ego. It dismantles it. It reminds us that the moment we stop being students of life, we start becoming prisoners of our own pride. Seneca once said, as long as you live, keep learning how to live. And that's not just a quote, it's a challenge. I once met a retired Navy officer at a coffee shop. He was in his 60s, sharp eyes, calm voice. We struck up a conversation, and I shared a thought I assumed he'd heard 100 times. But instead of brushing it off, he leaned in and asked, how did you come to that? I was stunned. This was a man who had commanded ships, led men into storms, and he still carried the humility to listen like a beginner. Afterward, he told me, the day I stop being curious is the day I start dying in slow motion. That stuck with me, because real intelligence doesn't interrupt to prove itself. It listens, it absorbs, it waits. The smartest men I know are never in a rush to show how much they know. They don't correct people mid-sentence. They don't use silence as a waiting room for their next opinion. They treat silence as a place of respect, a space where something new might enter, even if it's just a nuance, a detail, a shift in phrasing. It matters. So if you ever catch yourself thinking, yeah, I already know this, pause, lean in, because maybe, just maybe, you're not supposed to learn the fact, you're supposed to learn the perspective. That's what intelligent men understand. They don't collect knowledge like trophies. They treat it like a flowing river. You step in today, and it's not the same water as yesterday. They stay teachable. Because to grow, you must remain open. And to remain open, you must quiet the voice that insists, I already know. 2. That's impossible. A few years ago, I worked with a man named Thomas. He had the kind of presence that made people trust his judgment. Firm, methodical, always in control. But there was one thing he said more often than anything else. That won't work. Didn't matter what it was. A suggestion to expand our services, a new marketing approach, even a simpler way to do paperwork. His answer was always the same. At first, it sounded reasonable, grounded, practical. But after a while, I started noticing something deeper. Thomas wasn't evaluating ideas. He was reacting to fear. Fear of change, fear of failing, fear of uncertainty. He wasn't describing the world. He was describing his limits. And that phrase, "that won't work," became his shield. It kept him safe, but it also kept him small. The Stoics saw this clearly. Seneca once wrote, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality." Thomas wasn't lazy or foolish. He was just afraid of what he couldn't control. And so, he stopped trying. Fast forward a few years, I found myself in a project that should have been a disaster. Tight deadlines, half the budget, and a team that had never worked together. The old voice in me wanted to say, "There's no way this works." But instead, I remembered a question I once read in Marcus Aurelius's writings. What's within your power right now? So that's what I asked myself. What can I do today? What's the smallest useful action I can take? That became the rhythm. One small step, then the next, and the next. No big leaps, just steady movement. That project, it didn't just succeed, it transformed our entire department. Not because we had some genius plan, but because we didn't let fear pose as logic. When a man says, "That's impossible," he's not talking about the task. He's talking about his relationship to discomfort. Intelligent men don't run from the unknown. They face it in pieces, with calm, with focus, with discipline. They know that not seeing the whole path isn't a reason to stop walking. In fact, it's the reason to start. Stoic courage isn't reckless bravery. It's the persistence to act. Despite fear, despite odds, despite uncertainty. That's what separates noise from clarity. Fear says, "Wait until it's safe." Wisdom says, "Take the next step anyway." Because when you do, you'll often find the path wasn't blocked. You just hadn't walked far enough to see the way through. 3. That's not my fault. There's a quiet phrase that slips from a man's mouth in moments of pressure. That's not my fault. It sounds harmless, logical even, especially when things go wrong, in business, in love, in life. There's a natural urge to defend ourselves, to point out what wasn't our doing. But here's the hard truth. Every time we push responsibility away, we also push away our power to shape the outcome. Intelligent men understand this deeply. They've learned that responsibility isn't about assigning blame. It's about retaining influence. Because the moment you say, "It wasn't me," you also say, "There's nothing I can do." I once knew a guy named Mark. We worked together on a contract that went south fast. Deadlines were missed, miscommunication everywhere. The client walked, and Mark, he had the full list ready. The client was disorganized. The market conditions were rough. The team didn't deliver. All of it was partially true. But what he didn't see was this. While he was busy justifying himself, he lost the only thing that could have changed the next outcome, his ability to grow from it. He made the same mistake on the next project. And the next. Because when you refuse to own even a sliver of the problem, you forfeit your place in the solution. The Stoics were clear on this. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you respond that matters." And that response, it begins with ownership. The moment you take responsibility, you reclaim agency. You stop waiting for someone else to fix it. You start asking, what could I have done better? In my own life, this truth has changed everything. There were moments I wanted to defend myself, times when I was technically right. But when I paused and took a closer look, I saw the cracks I had ignored, the tone I used, the assumptions I made, the preparation I skipped. When you begin to say, "I could have handled that part better," something shifts. It's subtle but powerful. You stop being reactive. You become responsible, and responsibility is where strength lives. Blame is easy. It's cheap. It gets applause, but it keeps you stuck. Responsibility, it's heavier, but it builds muscle, of character, of wisdom. When you start choosing responsibility, you don't just fix the current problem. You become a better man for the next one. That's what intelligent men know. They don't wait to be rescued. They don't play the victim. They lead by example, not by finding someone to blame, but by finding a way forward. 4. I don't need any help. There's a quiet belief that creeps into the mind of many men. It doesn't shout. It doesn't announce itself. It just whispers in the background, "I've got this. I don't need anyone." It sounds noble, even heroic, independent, strong, the kind of mindset we're taught to admire, the lone wolf, the silent warrior, the man who carries the weight of his world without ever asking for help. But here's the truth. Most won't say out loud that belief. It doesn't make you strong. It makes you slowly disappear inside yourself. Years ago, I met a man named Jacob. He was in his early 50s, successful by most standards, owned a business, raised 2 kids on his own, respected in his community, but he carried a weariness in his eyes that no one seemed to notice. Not because he was weak, but because he never let anyone see that he was tired. One night, over coffee, he told me something I never forgot. He said, "You know, for 20 years, I thought being strong meant never letting anyone carry any of my load. I thought if I shared it, I'd look soft, vulnerable, less of a man." And then he paused. That worked for a while, until it didn't. Until I realized no one knew how heavy things had gotten, because I never gave them a chance to care. That conversation changed me, because like Jacob, I believed the same lie. That asking for help was failure. That silence was strength. But the Stoics knew better. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor philosopher, wrote openly in his journal about the men who taught him, guided him, challenged him. He didn't pretend to be self-made. He credited his growth to those around him, even those who disagreed with him. If the most powerful man in the ancient world could admit that he leaned on others. Why should we hide behind pride? The refusal to ask for help doesn't prove we're strong. It proves we're scared. Scared of being seen, scared of seeming weak, scared of giving up control, even for a moment. But here's the paradox. When you let someone help, you're not giving up power. You're expanding it, because connection, mutual support, is what makes a man resilient, not just tough. The Stoics didn't preach isolation. They taught self-mastery, yes, but they also believed we are part of a larger whole. We were built for cooperation, for brotherhood. Epictetus said, "No man is an island," and he meant it. The strongest among us are not those who carry every burden alone, but those who know when to say, "I can't do this alone." I've been there too. I've sat at my desk at midnight, drowning in pressure. Work deadlines, family stress, the silent war inside my own head. And I thought, if I just try harder, it'll get better. But it didn't. It got quieter, heavier, until I finally reached out. To a friend, to a mentor, to someone who would just listen. And in that moment, I didn't feel weak. I felt human again. What I found wasn't judgment. It was relief, clarity, strength, redefined. Because sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is not to hold it all in, but to let someone in. So if you've ever caught yourself saying, "I don't need any help," pause for a second. Ask yourself, is that strength speaking, or pride dressed in armor? True strength isn't about how long you can stand alone. It's about knowing when to reach for a hand and when to offer yours to someone else. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. 5. I'm too old for that. There's a phrase that quietly ends more dreams than failure ever could. It rarely comes with drama or tears. It often sounds reasonable, even wise. I'm too old for that. It's a sentence we whisper to ourselves, sometimes as a joke, sometimes to avoid disappointment. But what lies beneath is rarely humor. It's resignation, the quiet kind that says, "My time has passed. The best parts are already behind me." And once that belief takes hold, it doesn't just shrink our possibilities. It begins to erode our sense of purpose. I once met a man named David. He was 67 when he enrolled in a photography course, not because he wanted a new career, but because he had always wanted to see the world through a different lens. At first, he felt out of place. The youngest student was in his 20s. The instructor was half his age. He told me, "There was a moment when I almost walked out. I thought to myself, what am I doing here? This is a young man's game." But he stayed, and by the end of the course, his final project, a photo series of elderly hands, was the most talked about in the entire class. It wasn't his skill that moved people. It was his perspective, his courage to believe that life hadn't stopped offering him meaning, and he hadn't stopped having something to give. That's what stuck with me. Because I'm too old isn't a fact. It's a fear disguised as logic. The Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius wrote often about death, not as a dark prophecy, but as a reminder to live fully until the final breath. He didn't ask, "How much time do I have left?" He asked, "What will I do with the time that remains?" That's the real question. I've seen men in their 60s start new businesses, learn to paint, fall in love again, mentor boys who never had fathers. I've also seen men much younger give up on themselves far too soon. The difference was never age. It was mindset. The man who says, "I'm too old for that," closes a door that was never locked. But the man who asks, "What can I still do?" pushes it wide open. Stoic wisdom tells us that growth doesn't retire. It matures. It becomes more intentional, more focused, not rushed, not reckless, but rooted in clarity. That's the gift of age. You don't chase everything. You choose what matters. Your experiences become your compass. Your scars become your stories. And your time, your most precious asset. So no, you're not too old. You're too valuable to waste what's left. Whether you have 10 years ahead or just 10 days, there's still something waiting to be lived. Something waiting to be built or shared or learned. Don't let a quiet lie steal what's still yours. Ask yourself, what would I do if I didn't believe it was too late? Then, take the first step. 6. I'll do it later. Few phrases feel more innocent and more dangerous than this. I'll do it later. It sounds reasonable, responsible even, like we're planning ahead. But more often than not, later becomes a soft grave, where our most important intentions go to die. I once knew a man named Eric. He had a great job, 2 sons, a wife who adored him. From the outside, everything looked steady, but on the inside, he carried a list. A growing list of things he promised himself he'd get to. He'd say, "I'll write that letter next week. I'll take the boys camping when work slows down. I'll fix things with my brother after the holidays." But life didn't wait. One afternoon, Eric got a call. His brother had passed in an accident. No final talk, no closure, just silence. And a message draft that was never sent. He told me this story not for sympathy, but to remind me how fragile time really is. We think we have more of it until we don't. The Stoics never romanticized time. They saw it for what it was, finite, unpredictable, and beyond our control. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, you could leave life right now. It wasn't morbid. It was a call to clarity, because delay steals something subtle. Not just opportunity, but peace of mind. When we put off what matters, the call, the apology, the creative idea, We carry it around like a stone in our pocket. It weighs on us. Even when we forget it's there, it's shaping how we move, how we feel, how we look at the world. I've done it too. There were letters I meant to send, but let gather dust in my drawer. Conversations I meant to have, but convinced myself the moment wasn't right. And each delay became a tiny regret. Small, quiet, but they added up. Until one day, I stopped waiting. I picked up the phone. I said what I needed to say, and something shifted. The heaviness left. It wasn't about fixing everything. It was about no longer pretending. That later was guaranteed. That's what Stoicism teaches. Not to rush, but to act with purpose. Before time makes the decision for us. It's not about doing everything today, but it is about doing what matters. Even if it's just one small thing, because the man who waits for perfect timing often ends up living with perfect regret. 7. That's just how I am. There's a phrase that seems harmless. You've probably said it to yourself. Maybe in a moment of frustration. Maybe to end a conversation. That's just how I am. It sounds like self-awareness, like acceptance. But more often than not, it's not a reflection of peace. It's a quiet form of surrender. Because hidden underneath those 5 words is the decision to stop growing. I once worked with a man named Neil, brilliant at his job, fiercely independent, but known for one thing, his temper. He'd raise his voice in meetings, snap at teammates, storm out of discussions when things didn't go his way. And when someone finally confronted him, he just shrugged and said, "That's who I've always been." As if that made it untouchable, unchangeable, permanent. But here's the truth. What we do repeatedly, what we excuse continuously, becomes our identity. Not because it's who we are, but because we stop challenging it. The Stoics never believed character was fixed. They believed it was formed by practice, by reflection, by conscious choice. Epictetus said, "It's not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them." Likewise, it's not our nature that limits us, but the stories we tell ourselves about what that nature is. Change is uncomfortable. It pulls us out of what's familiar, even when that familiarity hurts us. But growth doesn't come from comfort. It comes from courage. The courage to ask hard questions. Is this really who I am? Or is this just what I've gotten used to being? I've asked myself that question many times. Years ago, I had a pattern. Whenever someone challenged my ideas, I'd shut down. Not out of anger, but fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear of not being respected. Fear of letting someone see where I hadn't figured it all out yet. And I would say, "That's just how I think," as if it were carved in stone. But it wasn't. What was really happening was that I didn't want to face what changing would require. Vulnerability, humility, effort, and those things are uncomfortable. but they're also the birthplace of wisdom, because intelligent men, they don't avoid change. They don't run from the work. They do it, not because they hate who they are, but because they respect themselves too much to stay stuck there. Stoicism teaches that self-mastery isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. You don't become wise by accident. You become wise by showing up every day and asking yourself, what can I do better today, even if it's uncomfortable? That's how identity is shaped, not in declarations, but in choices, day after day. So when someone says, "That's just how I am," I hear something else now. I hear fear. I hear fatigue. I hear someone who's tired of trying, but hasn't yet realized that trying is the most human thing we do. We are not finished, not while we're still breathing. Nature is change. Life is change. And resisting that is resisting the very thing that makes us alive. So, if you've ever said that phrase, and we all have, know this: you're not stuck, you're not fixed, you're in motion, and the direction you go starts with the next decision you make. If something today stirred a quiet thought in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this with someone who's walking their own path in silence. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Not for noise, but for reminders that stillness has power. I'll meet you in the next reflection.